The day I found the first plot hole was the day my best friend came back from the dead. We were in high school. Jake was his name, and we liked to go out to this old abandoned house in the woods after school. We would do stupid things. It was a pretty big place, to be honest. It was a 2-story house with a basement, or 3 stories if you counted the small attic above it. It was supposed to be haunted. An old woman was building the house years and years ago in order to get away from the city life. But, for some reason, she never finished it. She probably died. Anyway, the house was pretty close to completion when she stopped, but nobody bothered to finish it, and now it just sits there, rotting away. So Jake and I would go to the house and just scare each other, or explore, whatever we felt like. Nothing ever happened to make us worry. It was just stupid kid stuff. Then the floorboards broke under Jake's feet when we were exploring the 2nd floor, and he fell. I never realized how bad the condition of the house must have been in. When he hit the 1st floor, that broke too, and he fell into the basement. I ran down and looked through the broken hole in the 1st floor. It was dark, so dark, but we usually had the foresight to bring flashlights, so I shined a light on him. I'll never forget what I saw. One of the boards or something must have fallen at just the right angle. It was stuck right through his chest like a spear. I could see him shift and try to grab at it. I could even hear his gurgling, gasping breaths, and then he just stopped. He was dead. I was sure of it. I was in shock, I think. I didn't know what to do, so I just ran. I ran out of the house and left him there. It was late evening when I got home and I went straight to my room. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't stop for anything. I just wanted to curl up and try to forget that scene. My parents tried to talk to me, but I pretended to be asleep, so they would go away. Later that night, we got a call from Jake's parents asking where he was. They actually woke me up for that one, and I said I had no idea. The usual, well, if you see him, please let us know. I just nodded before I went back to sleep. The next day I had school, and I went through the morning ritual in a bit of a trance. I didn't want to go, but I couldn't stay home. I was pretty sure Jake's parents already knew something was wrong, so I went. School was just like usual. People screwing around in the morning and talking. I went up to my normal group of friends that I hung out with before the first bell rang, and my heart stopped. There was Jake. He stood there, just laughing and being his normal self. When he saw me, he looked over and grinned before coming over. He made a joke, but I didn't hear it. I just continued to stare. "Hey, you okay?" he asked, looking concerned. Are you okay?" was all I could stutter back. "Well, yeah, why wouldn't I be?" He laughed a bit and gave me a weird look. You don't feel weak or anything?" I tried to phrase it as delicately as possible. I didn't want anyone else knowing, but I figured that was enough to clue him in. If it did, he didn't show it. "Weak?" he responded, and then the bell rang. He said bye and gave me a weird look before heading off to class. I just stared after in shock. Why was my friend here? I saw him die. At the very least, he should be in the hospital, but he looked fine. I went to class, but I couldn't concentrate. I just kept thinking about Jake and how he should be dead. I kept trying to think of how he could have survived or was back from the dead. But I couldn't believe he was a zombie or some kind of ghoul, no matter how many times I had wished creatures like that existed. Jake met me after school and asked if I still wanted to hang out. I told him I wasn't feeling well and we'd catch up tomorrow. He seemed to accept that and left me with a quick "see you tomorrow." It's not like I wasn't excited my friend was back, but looking at him made something in me cringe. He shouldn't be alive. He should not be here. I saw him. I started walking. I had no choice. The answer was at that house. As I opened the door and walked in, I could feel something. It was strange, but familiar. It was the same feeling I got when I looked at Jake. Something just wasn't right. However, here it felt like a lingering feeling, not this fresh "what the hell" I got from Jake. I stepped forward and looked down. Sure enough, there was the damn hole he fell through. so I wasn't crazy. I clicked on my flashlight and shone it down into the hole. There was the rack I saw him land on. Just no Jake. How did he survive? Did he regenerate or something? I shone my flashlight up to look toward the hole in the second floor. It wasn't there. My breath caught in my throat and I began to frantically shine my light onto the ceiling. Where was it? It should be right above the damn hole in the floor, but nothing. I bolted up the stairs and stopped at the landing. The floor was intact, not even a cracked floorboard. Something was wrong, really wrong. In a daze, I wandered back down to the first hole and peeked down into it. I'm sure that was the moment that sealed my fate. If I had just ignored it, moved on, and been happy that my friend was back, I might have been able to live out my life as usual. But that moment, I saw something. Just a flash of something black, blacker than the darkness beyond my flashlight's range, shift and fly out of sight. I gasped and stumbled back, breathing heavily. I know I should have ran, but something stopped me. I swallowed my fear and I leaned over to peer into the blackness again. I didn't see the flash of black again, but I did notice something. The boards and wreckage underneath the hole were now gone. I bolted and I ran out of the house and through the forest. As I ran, I thought something was chasing me. I had a feeling there was something out there, but now I know it was simply watching me, for now. I could barely get the key in the door when I got home. My legs so wobbly, I don't know how I made it into my room. I curled up in my bed and I just lay there, trying to comprehend what was going on. It took me a while, but I finally drew myself out of my bed. I had to figure out what was going on, but like hell I was going back to that damn house. So I grabbed my laptop and prayed for the internet to save me. It was slow, and I didn't have a lot of luck at first. Looking up paranormal just got me weird pictures and stories. Friend comes back from dead got me a lot of zombie stuff. But a few stories seemed to pique my interest, like something crazy seeming to happen, like a car crash or accident. And suddenly, there's a time jump, and things seem to be okay, like nothing ever happened. There was one post on a missing time board that seemed to draw my attention. It was titled Plot Holes, and was only posted a couple of days ago. I clicked it. Everyone seemed to speculate what caused this whole missing time thing. Mostly was aliens or dimensional whatever. But this one guy, he acted like he knew, and his reason was the most terrifying of them all. He started by telling a similar story. In a nutshell, his wife was killed in a freak accident when part of their house caved in during a storm. While trying to get to her, he was knocked out by some debris. When he came to, he was sitting in the living room, and his wife was trying to wake him up. The house was fine, with no sign of disaster, and she was alive. He was ecstatic, but described a strange feeling, like he'd figured out something he shouldn't have. It's intense fear, a dizzy sensation like deja vu, and a feeling of being outside of time. The same thing I felt with Jake. Over time, he couldn't be around her, so he left. He went on the road, taking what money he had and doing odd jobs here and there while staying in motels. While he went, he began to research. It took a great amount of time, but he found others with similar experiences. Most of them just described it as a miracle and moved on with their lives. Others couldn't shake the feeling. All of them described the same sort of thing. Some event should have caused something to happen. A person would die or some landmark would be destroyed, only to have it come back later. So what was going on? The author was at a standstill until he came across something while researching people who shouldn't be alive. He came across a movie review. Apparently, it was the latest film in a series, and in it, a side character saves the day by fighting off a bunch of enemies for the heroes. However, in the previous movies, by a different screenwriter, that character had been killed. So this character couldn't have come back to save the day, but if he didn't, the main characters would have died. The reviewer said it was one of the worst plot holes he'd ever seen. That got the forum author, and me, thinking. He said he'd post again after he experimented a bit, and I didn't blame him. I had a few things I wanted to experiment with as well. Nevertheless, I dropped him a message, saying I read his post and that something similar had happened to me. I fell asleep to the chirping of birds. When I woke up, I started my first attempt at looking for plot holes. I know how crazy that sounds, but something seemed to click after reading that review. Someone should have died. But that was ignored so that he could do something significant later. It sounded so familiar. The first few days, I didn't notice anything except for the weird feeling around Jake. Nobody else seemed to have it. The third day was when I noticed my first plot hole. It was minor. It was just the most minor of details, but it was there. One of the girls in my class went from wearing a skirt to jeans between classes. It sounds like I'm crazy, I know, but to change into a pair of jeans within 7 minutes while walking across campus to another class? That doesn't make sense. I guess it's possible, but it didn't make sense. After that, it went all downhill. I kept seeing changes everywhere. A sign would be black in the morning, but light green later at night, or a friend would go from wearing a sweater to a t-shirt when I looked away for a moment. You'd think that people would notice these changes, but nobody did. Maybe you just had to be looking for them, but they're everywhere. It was about a week and a half before I got a response back from the plot hole's author. He introduced himself as David and apologized for being late to respond. His reason why? He was noticing the same thing I was. This is the first time I've ever actually spoken to this guy, but the changes he described matched mine to a T, except for one thing. After noticing a misspelled sign above a store late at night, he saw a shadowy black hooded figure floating by it. It was hazy, like looking at the figure through a fog that just wasn't there. But after the thing floated away, the spelling error was gone. A shiver went down my spine. That seemed too close to whatever I might have glimpsed at the house. I hadn't seen it full on yet, but now I knew what I was looking for. I wish I didn't know. It wasn't long before I began to see them. You had to look at just the right moment, I found out. When it seemed like nobody was watching or paying attention to that little error you just noticed. Then you could make it out. A shadowy haze of a being messing with the error until it changed it. I saw one fade my friend's t-shirt into a hoodie on a cold day in class, and I saw another change an entire stack of books at the library into a completely different set before they were picked up by a student. Nobody notices them, just like the holes. It's like you had to be on the same wavelength. David agrees with that idea. It seemed that you had to notice one to start seeing the others. If you could brush it off, then your life would go on. But if you were like the two of us, you just keep seeing them all the time. I was starting to go crazy. I couldn't say anything to anyone, and Jake kept bothering me about why we never hung out anymore. I just couldn't look at him. Those things brought him back. Maybe he had some destiny or something, but he just felt so uncanny. Things took another turn when I was on Skype with David. He asked if they noticed me yet. I told him no, and then he got quiet for a long time. After some bugging, he finally responded and told me one of his friends that was helping him look into this occurrence was gone. Nobody even seemed to remember his existence. When he went over to his friend's house, David found it relatively neat, save for a few items strewn about. As he explored, the belongings that were out of place began to find themselves back in their positions. David was sure that this is one of those creatures behind it, and he confirmed his suspicions when he saw one putting back a book that had been thrown to the floor. And then it turned and looked at him. The two stared at each other for a long time, the creature gazing at David while David looked into the blank nothingness that was its face, a dark hood covering whatever might have lurked beneath. And then it turned and seemed to float away right through one of the walls. Then David began to notice something else. There were no pictures or objects identifying an owner. No mail, nothing. It was like nobody had ever lived in this fully furnished home. At this point, I began to worry. David's friend had gone missing. I started putting the pieces together then. If these creatures could bring someone back from the dead, then they could easily get rid of someone. After that, I stopped. I was out. I ignored David's messages. I tried to ignore all the holes I constantly noticed, I did my best to ignore those shadow creatures when I caught them. I even tried to hang back out with Jake. But every time we were together, it was like I was looking at the face of death, and looking at him just made me think of those creatures. I imagined one pulling him up from the debris, slipping that board through and out of his body, knitting up his wounds like nothing happened. I did my best to look past it all. David was hard to ignore, however. He just kept tracking me down. I'd block him from my email and messengers, but he'd just start making new accounts to send me messages. And he seemed to be sending more and more as the days went on. Finally, one day, I received an email from a new account that clearly was David. I was about to delete it and block him, but the subject chilled me to the bone. They're after me. Get on Skype. I need help. I didn't know what to do. If David was in trouble from these things, then I had to help. I couldn't just leave him, but they might turn their sights on me. I logged onto Skype, added his new account, and immediately got a video chat request. David was in his apartment with the lights off, and he looked terrified. What's going on? I asked as I leaned in. They've been following me around. His voice a whisper. More and more of them. Keep coming around. Not just to fill in the holes. They're watching me. Are you sure? In response, he lifts up his laptop and carried it out to what looked to be a kitchen. He set it down in front of a window and drew back the curtain. I couldn't make out anything until he turned on the light. My heart stopped. I'd mostly seen one of them at a time, maybe even two if something was particularly big. But there was at least 3 or 4 behind that window, just staring with those empty hooded faces. He quickly flicked off the light and turned the laptop back toward him. Do you see? I don't know what to do. I don't want to end up like Jerry. Tell me what to do. He was getting more and more anxious. I had no idea what to tell him. I didn't know what these things were. I didn't know what they wanted or how to stop them. I opened my mouth but couldn't form the words that he needed to hear. And as I stammered, I saw them slip into the background behind him, through the wall. David, behind you! He turned just as the first approached. God, there were so many. Now 3, 4, 5. He never stood a chance. The first reached forward with an inky arm and shoved it straight through his chest. There wasn't any blood or even a sound save for David's terrified scream. He began to writhe, grasping at his chest as the creatures held him there by, I don't even know what. His spine? His heart? Hell, it could have been his very soul for all I know. Then the others were on top of him. They fell onto him like a pack of dogs, consuming him in their dark embrace. I couldn't scream, I couldn't look away. I just watched as he faded from view as those creatures piled onto him. Then slowly, ever so slowly, they backed away. David was gone. I bit back tears as I saw the empty space he had been in. I knew what had happened. He was gone, erased. Nobody would even remember him. He was a hole that had to be filled in and taken care of. Then, their attention turned to the computer, to me. My eyes widened as realization hit me. I was another hole. I was an issue in their grand scheme, a thorn that had to be plucked, a part that drew attention to the inaccuracies of this world that they were trying to design. And I had to be taken care of. I didn't even bother to turn off the computer. I just stood and turned to find myself face to face with a horde of them, in my own house, in my own room. My back went to my desk as one shadowy shade glided toward me. Its arm rose, and I could almost make out the tendrils of its floppy black cloak and the individual digits of its dark fingers. I couldn't move. I was frozen, and then it struck. I didn't physically feel the hand shove into my chest, but I felt it somewhere deeper, like it was grabbing an intimate part of my being. I felt violated, exposed, and most of all, completely terrified. I screamed as it began to squeeze. It hurt so fucking much. My vision blurred, and I could see the others move around me. They moved into a circle around my body, regardless if there was something in their way or not. They just glided through. and then they fell upon me. Darkness hit me from every side. I screamed, but no sound came out. I could feel that hand wrenching back, pulling something so personal to me away. My body felt limp, my limbs slowly turning cold. The pain and terror was absolute. Then, nothing. I can only describe it as a feeling of being erased. I was gone. I knew it, or worse, I didn't exist any longer. Stretched out before me was nothing but darkness. I tried to call out into the void, to claw my way forward, but I couldn't move a limb, or more like, I didn't have a limb to move, or a mouth to yell. I was just an essence, floating in an endless void of nothing. I'm still here, in pure nothingness. I can't move, or maybe I don't have anything left to move. It's gone. Every part of me is gone. I wonder what happens now. I wonder what Jake's destiny was. I wonder if this is death or purgatory. Maybe a punishment for sticking my nose in places it shouldn't be. Maybe I'll get a second chance. Maybe reincarnation. I'm sure David is feeling the same things I'm feeling. I can almost see him, floating in the same void. Maybe one day we'll meet each other. It's a hope that I try to keep alive. It keeps me sane, that I might, one day, not be alone here. I wish I had a better ending for my story. I wish I could say I fought back and saved myself, that I was on the run, but some plots don't have happy endings. However, I'm sure I've left you wondering one final thing. If I'm erased, then how could I have written this? Well, my friend, you've just discovered your first plot hole. Be wary if you see any more. And I'm so very sorry.